Well, thank you for joining me for another iTWire video with top Australian IT executives. I have with me today David Oakley. He is the Managing Director for Australia and New Zealand of ServiceNow. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Alex. Great to be here.
So I thought I'd just get you to please explain to us what ServiceNow does, what are your offerings, and how do you help people do business?
Great, thank you. So the tagline for us is service management for the enterprise. So perhaps I'll work back a little bit in history and where the companies came from and,
Sure.
and where we're at now. So the company started out back in the day very IT focused, so we used to run a software as a service platform for the service desk. So an example being that the printer's broken or the network is down, somebody wants to be able to raise a ticket and get service on that. And over a number of years we started to build that out with a lot of customer assistance to start providing a much broader IT footprint.
As they matured, your services matured too.
Exactly. So the customers have really helped us come on the journey over the last few years. But we broadened out that IT capability to start to look at things like asset management, governance, risk and compliance, project portfolio management, so a lot of those adjacent areas. And again, the focus for us was very much selling to the CIO as a line of business and providing them a platform that they can run an enterprise IT organisation.
So how long have you been in Australia?
The company's been in Australia for a number of years, so we started out here through some of our reseller partners, which is still part of our partner ecosystem at the moment. I personally started with ServiceNow just coming up towards 2 years ago.
And what were some of the things you were doing in the past?
My history is mainly around software development and enterprise workflow integration type background.
So, who are some of the local customers and some of your global customers that you can talk about?
Yeah, so we've got a predominant focus around the global 5,000. So we have quite a high proportion of the global 2,000, and that's certainly a big focus for us globally and locally. Here in Australia, we tend to focus on quite a broad spectrum, so we've got a good range of customers across different industries. We're in 4 banking clients here in Australia, we're in 2 of the larger telecommunication clients here in Australia, and we've got a good footprint across government and other industries here, and quite a good range in terms of both large enterprises, some of the very largest miners on earth, all the way down to some very, very small organisations.
So, I mean, you mentioned originally that you were helping customers with tickets, and you went into some detail. But can you go over again some of your main service offerings? And I mean, we hear a lot of buzzwords these days: shadow IT and hybrid cloud, and everyone's worried about security. And so, how does all that fit into what you do? And what's some of the broader service offerings that you have?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, our main focus historically has been around selling to and working with the IT organisation. It's almost been a little bit like the worst house in the street in terms of if they're a gardener, then there's an overgrown lawn at the front of the house.
Yeah.
So, and I think the IT organisation has been a little bit like that. That they've been a bit of a poor cousin in terms of how they run their own operations. So I think ServiceNow has provided a platform for a lot of IT organisations to really transform how they run the operation, but also to transform the way the business views IT. So we've allowed organisations to put a much more modern front end to that business interface to the organisation. So when people want to request a service or to report an outage or to engage with IT in any shape or form, having some of that consumer experience brought to enterprise IT is something that we've had in our DNA from day one. So that's a big focus of what we've worked with organisations around that enterprise self-service and request management. And then, as I mentioned, taking that down into, okay, how do we run the overall IT operation more efficiently, more effectively, and with greater transparency?
And I mean, are they the industry trends that are driving adoption of ServiceNow, or is there something else there that you would say, people, they're using apps to do things? I mean, what are some of the other industry trends?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think ServiceNow, going back a few years ago, really found a sweet spot in the market in terms of certainly cloud adoption was globally and in Australia has been.
I mean, that's very mature now.
Very strong momentum around that, and I think we're at a point now of really being in that probably the late majority in terms of market adoption. So I think offering our offerings as a service was certainly a good place to be in, and I think the specific point in the market that we started out around that IT service automation, IT service management, was really a space that was very, very ripe for innovation.
Now recently you had some announcements where you had added new modules to your system. Tell us about some of the recent media announcements.
Sure, so last week we announced the Fuji release. So we provide 2 major releases typically each year. And the Fuji release is really a continuation of two themes. So one is around that IT, so selling and providing for the IT or CIO. And the main, one of the main areas of new functionality there is around something called IT financial management. So it's really providing that high-level dashboard to the CIO to be able to see all of their costs interfacing with the general ledger, to be able to see the different projects and deployments that they've got underway, and to be able to marry those two things together. So whether it's around show back or charge back to the business, but being able to get that transparency and being able to get that greater control over that IT delivery is obviously very important to most of the CIOs that we work with. The other part of the release in terms of a major focus area is that over the last few years, organically and you know, somewhat driven by us, has been a move of a lot of our customers to move beyond IT service management. So taking some of the practices and disciplines around that request and automation and fulfillment process within IT and starting to apply that into other areas. So the most common areas historically have been around HR and around facilities. And so if you think about a facilities incident or a facilities request, there's a mess in the bathroom, or I need to provision a new workstation. The interface, or the way that you go about requesting that and the type of visibility and automation that you want in those sort of scenarios is very, very similar to IT. So a lot of our customers historically have taken the IT workflows, rebadged them somewhat, and then applied those to other parts of their organisation. So that's something that we've certainly embraced. It was part of the vision that we had for the company when we first started, was to provide a much broader suite of services to the market. So over time we've productised that. We've had a HR capability for a while, we've had a field services automation capability for a while, and we've had a facilities automation capability for quite some time. So we've continued on that journey around that broadening of service management to an enterprise service management discipline. And in the most recent release, as of last week, we released a marketing automation capability, a legal automation capability, and a finance. And it's the common things that people are requesting within the enterprise. So it's things like, I want to request an NDA to be completed by legal. I want to request a purchase order to be raised by finance. It's provisioning those things within a nice user interface in terms of the service catalogue, being able to give insight in terms of how service levels are being met, and then starting to automate those functions. And I guess one of the observations, and I think part of the reason we've been quite successful in the Australian market, is that if you have a look at the composition of the Australian market, obviously there's a lot of mining and so forth, but it's a very, very high services base in Australia. I think around about 70% of the market is of GDP in Australia is made up of service industry. So we've been very successful into education, into professional services and technical services, because a lot of those businesses with fairly high cost bases are looking for ways to do things better. So I think if you have a look at the way work is typically done in an organisation, I think relatively speaking IT is quite mature, but you go broader than that, and most people are getting work done in very, very ad hoc manners. There's emails going back and forward, there's spreadsheets, there's more emails, there's more spreadsheets, there's walking around and seeing someone, there's phone calls, and to get anything done, you've typically got 30, 40 interactions going back and forward, being escalated. There's very limited visibility into those things, and I think the ServiceNow platform and the capability that we've originated in IT provides so much benefit to those other areas. So instead of sending off an email to an alias at HR or to facilities or to legal, you can go to a service catalogue, request some of those common services, have insight like you do with an Amazon order in terms of where that is at,
tracking,
and have automated approvals based on business rules, and start to really automate a lot of those functions. So I think typically in an organisation where under-automated and overstaffed, quite honestly. Yeah. So I think there's a lot more productivity that people are starting to drive with the ServiceNow platform.
If we can make all this work, we'd be much closer to getting the paperless office happening.
I don't know if that's ever a reality, but no. It's certainly a continuation of it.
Well, I mean, based just on that trend, which never seems to have emerged in the paperless office, do you see any other IT trends affecting the ANZ or global marketplace? I mean, what's the future for ServiceNow over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that we look at internally is that, as a company, we've grown enormously over the last 3 years, but we're always planning for what is the next 3 years.
As you should,
so, certainly in terms of investments and so on, we're making some very big investments globally and in the Australian market. We've got 2 fully fledged data centres here that we operate in order to provide the types of platform and service that our customers want. So we're running at a 5 nines availability because we want to be that enterprise platform for people to start to automate the way work is done within the enterprise. So we're certainly making big investments there. We've made some very big investments in the Australian market space over the last 12 months around an Asia Pacific hub for support services. So we've got quite a big support team that's been built out within the Australian market, and we run network operations and data center operations as well as some of those classic support functions in Australia. We're making big investments in working with government because I think that's an area that, in terms of where that market is at, the cloud momentum is really starting to build and just starting to probably become a little bit more mainstream. So we're certainly making big investments in that space. And I think the other area that we're seeing in terms of trends and where we're trying to invest ahead of the curve is around that platform, around the idea of more and more being consumed through the cloud, and wanting to make sure that when we do consume through the cloud that we've got very, very high service levels, very, very high confidence in terms of availability, security and reliability. So all of those things are areas that we're investing very heavily in.
Now, just sort of on a slightly different track, and just to get away from some of the marketing type stuff, I always like to ask the people I interview about the best piece of advice that they ever received to help them get to where they are today, which sort of helps to humanize and give us a bit of an insight into you as a person.
Okay. In a career sense, I've probably had a lot of good advice over the years, but I think probably the key, if I was to distill it down, I think it's just being yourself. I think you need to be real in what you're doing, and you need to be genuine with people, and I think that'll generally take you a long way.
Keep you in good stead. Yeah. So any final messages for iTWire viewers and readers and for your current and potential customers?
I think the cloud journey that most customers are on is something that we'd obviously love to help with. So there's various ways that we help organisations, whether it's around modernising and transforming IT, whether it's trying to get cost transparency control around outsourcing of IT and shared service functions, and certainly around trying to bring some of the disciplines and best practices from IT and applying that in more of an enterprise sense is something that gets us out of bed every day and gets us very excited, and we'd love to share some of that with you.
Great. Thank you very much, David. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Alex.